We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the laws. We enforce them. But at the end of the day, each and every member is to go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is Thursday. I had to think what day it was. It is Thursday, June 2nd, 2016, and we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen live on Spreaker.com and NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, and SoundCloud, as well as the next day on Stitcher. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And we are happy to hear from you today and every day that we are on the air at 702-470-7664. That is the phone number, 702-470-7664. You can also Skype into the show by sending a Skype request, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and just sending your name and what you want to talk about. And you can check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, which links to all our Facebook pages, our other social media info, as well as our contact info and more, including the new series that I've been working on, which I'm trying to come up with a name for it, because it's more in an article format, but it's also kind of a blog. So right now I'm calling it an article/blog, but in the future, maybe we'll call it a blogicle or something. But anyway, I'm writing a series on the drug war and why all drugs should be legal. Right now, I'm on part 3. So there are 3 articles. Each article can stand alone, but is also part of the series. I'm going to try to cover every aspect that I can and that I have ideas on. So this is more of a long-term project, and I hope to at least release an article once a week, if not more. So as last week, I think I did all 3 articles last weekend. So it all depends on, how much time I have to do that. So that is the plan. But there are also other articles, editorials, and things like that on the site as well. So please check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. We have a few different things I want to cover today. One, the shooting at UCLA and how that was handled, and how a lot of these shootings are being handled. And in this shooting, it was definitely a targeted shooting, whereas they or whereas in many instances you have just shootings where lunatics want to come and just shoot a bunch of people, this was a targeted shooting. And I don't get why it happening in a school, it could have happened anywhere. It's just the people that they had planned on shooting were at the school. So obviously that's the best place to shoot them. There were 2 professors, one was shot, and then they had found a list. And we'll get into that in more detail later in the show. But I just wanted to say this regarding the list, that they make it sound like the fucking media, government media, they make it sound like he had a big long list and he just didn't get to it. Now, keep in mind, this is a murder-suicide. So this kid killed himself after he killed a professor. So he was going to kill 2 professors, killed himself. I believe the other one was a professor. But he was going to kill 2, he was going to kill 2 professors, and I guess he couldn't find the other one, so he said, fuck it, I'll just kill myself. It was probably, by that point, the school was crawling with cops, and there was no way he was going to get to the other professor. But they make it sound like he had like a list of like 20 people. When you get into the details. So what happens today in media is we live in a time where everything's headlines. You hear a couple lines of a fucking story, so much goes on. We have so much media now outside of government media, so because of the internet. But there are so many forms of delivery. So you might just hear a headline and think that, okay, this crazy lunatic, and I'm not saying that he wasn't crazy, but what I am saying is that these were targeted killings, but you might hear part of the story and think that he had a list of 20 people that he was going to kill. And that wasn't the case. He had planned on killing 2 people. So, and this was targeted. It wasn't everyone's in school, everyone that went to the school is in danger. And I can just picture how people that went to the school that didn't even, there were UCLA is a huge school. There's 40,000 people there. And how some of the kids play it up like, yeah, I was at the school where the professor was killed, and yeah, I was nowhere near it, and I didn't know him or anything, but oh my God, and like they need to be fucking consoled, and all the, how they play it up and all that bullshit. And I'm sorry, I don't feel bad for any of the kids that didn't know the professor, that weren't anywhere near the shooting. Now, obviously, I feel bad for the professor and his family and any kids who happen, and I don't think anybody even seen it, but if you happen to see it, that can be very traumatizing to see somebody kill somebody as well. But outside of that, and it sounds like this kid or man, I don't know if I'm looking at the shooter or the other person on the list. No, it was the shooter, was 38 years old. He was a former doctoral student. So I don't know if anybody really even knew him. So, and it's not clear if the other person that he was going to shoot was in Minnesota or not. So because this is just an article that was just released, that a he was a former doctoral student, Minnesota resident, left a list at his home in that state that included the names of the woman, UCLA professor William Klug, that's the one that was killed, and a second professor who was safe. So, and then it says authorities declined to name the woman in Minnesota or a possible motive. So, it sounds like the other professor was not even a UCLA professor. So, looking at this and how they handled it, and we'll get into that later, and how kids there probably compare this to stuff like Columbine or Virginia Tech, or, you know, those few shootings. I know they want to, of course, increase the amount of shootings, even though shootings keep going down every year, but that this was totally different. How is this different? And in all seriousness, how is this different than somebody wanting to kill two people for whatever reason, going to their house and shooting them, and say going to both persons' houses? So they go to the first person, they shoot them, then say the cops show up and they know they can't get away, so they kill themselves. Now, that would be looked at in a totally different light. However, what's the fucking difference? There isn't one. But because it happens to be in a school, and keep in mind, we are not talking about a fucking high school or elementary school or anything that could probably, you know, fit in an area of, I don't know. I mean, it's a 40,000 student school. And I don't know if I'm big into college football, and I don't know if the Bruins Stadium, well, they play at the Rose Bowl, so it's obviously it's not on campus. Do they play? Yeah, UCLA plays at the Rose Bowl, so the stadium isn't on campus, but I don't know how far it is, and I've been right around that area because when I had worked for Avery Dennison, their corporate office is like right there in that area, in the general area. But this is a huge school, so making this out to be a school shooting, which it happened at a school, fine, it's a school shooting, but making it out to be a school shooting in the same vein as a lot of these other school shootings it doesn't do it justice. Because like I said, when you have, they don't like to differentiate, and I think this is on purpose, obviously, because you have the government media wants to ban guns. I don't give a fuck what they say. They'd like to ban every fucking gun there is, the government, and only, you know, of course, have tons of guns for them, so guns wouldn't be going anywhere. As far as the manufacturing would probably stay the same or even increase, because every government agent is going to have a fucking gun. But unless you're part of the government, you're not going to have one. So I don't give a fuck what they say. They'd love to get rid of every gun. So they love the narrative that in each shooting that takes place within an area that would be referred to as a school or a place of higher education or higher learning or lower learning, I guess, as well, in the case of elementary schools, or which it's very bad, of course, when something like that happens. But high schools is the main, when it comes to school shootings. Colleges and high schools are the main places where they have taken place. But they rarely they do differentiate in the sense that, yes, if you want to get into the story, if you want to take the time to read the fine print, you can find out that, okay, this was based on this person wanting to kill somebody else for whatever reason, that it wasn't about some lunatic wanting to shoot a place up. It was about specific, a specific person that they wanted to kill for whatever reason or injured. And a lot of times in those cases, you have other people that get shot accidentally. And of course, they love when that happens because then they can throw that in as well. But they're not the same thing. And you can't look at them the same way because, again, you're looking at the place where a shooting occurred. It doesn't even have to be a shooting. What about just a place where a murder occurred? And the fact that it's a shooting in this case doesn't really mean anything, in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. Because you have this professor, you have this 38-year-old man. I don't think he would have had a problem with a sword or a big knife or something like that. They showed pictures of the professor who got killed. Oh, maybe they haven't. I was looking at a picture of, I think, Celine Dion's husband. He fell out of bed the day of his death. I didn't even know I thought I had heard he had died. He was like a lot older than her. But I thought in the same article that they showed a picture of the professor somewhere. Maybe not. Actually, you know what? I did see a picture of the professor when I looked at all the YouTube videos, and he was actually young. So I guess it's possible, although he didn't look like a guy, and this is a total generalization. It doesn't mean anything. He didn't look like a guy who could fight or something, but he could have possibly ran or got away, I guess, if he didn't have a gun. I don't know enough about the specific confrontation, but the point being is that for whatever reason, and it might have been some lunatic reason, usually if somebody commits first-degree murder, and first-degree murder is premeditated murder, unless it's something like the guy, raped and murdered the murderer's wife or daughter, or did something really bad to them like that, I would say in the majority of cases, and this is just my opinion, of course, that if you commit first-degree murder, you're most likely crazy or you're an assassin who's doing it for the money. And I don't mean to laugh at that, but I'm saying, that would be the only other reason that I could think of as to why somebody would commit first-degree murder, which, again, first-degree murder is premeditated murder. So, in this case, this was a guy. I'm kind of pausing because I can hear people outside, and I'm always nervous about them being in my backyard messing with my dog, because we have had incidences of people next door not only leaving notes but actually going into our backyard trying to tell us that we shouldn't have left the dog out and it was abuse, even though it was like 75 degrees and we leave water, and I don't see what the problem is. And it's a pretty big, it's not a big backyard, but I mean, it's a big backyard for a fucking dog, for especially a little dog. But anyway, so what we're really making this well, not we, because I'm not doing it, but what the government and government media, and I say government whether they said a word about it or not, because they're backing the government media, giving them their talking points, telling them the stories to say. It's funny when you hear those clips, when somebody will take and edit a clip together of different newscasts, and they'll all say the same fucking thing. And it's like, you know why. But on a side note, I made a bad choice earlier today. And I do this over and over again, and I'm sure a lot of you guys do it as well. So there's like a sweet, I'm sure everybody has sweets that they like and they get, and they know that if they get it and have too much of it, or if it's a certain size, like a shake, and drink the whole thing or eat the whole thing, that it's probably going to upset their stomach or make them a little sick because of the sugar, or maybe just too much of it, or for whatever reason. But of course, you forget how you feel after. You just remember how you feel at that moment that you want to have that shake, and you get it anyway and end up drinking the whole thing, and then you're sick to your stomach. And that's how I feel right now. Drinking some water. So I just had to add that there. But really the only difference between this, unless there's things that I'm unaware of, which is possible, between this and, because what if he went to the professor's house, which probably would have been a lot smarter, actually. Although the difference is that, you know, when you go to a school, that most likely no one there is going to have a gun. If you go to their house, although this is in California, so it's not the easiest place to get a gun. But if you go to their house, there's a better chance that they could also have a gun. But in this case, I would say that they probably would have had a better chance of going to their house, because the amount of police that ended up showing up, and I don't know how the police were alerted. In all the videos that I watched, it really didn't go into that. So I'm still not sure how they were alerted. Hopefully, we can find some of that out. So I'm going to talk more about that. We're also going to talk all about, sorry about that. I usually put my phone on, I got to remember. I do it with my computer where essentially you will not hear any notifications. I went through everything because I thought it was unprofessional, and I'd hear it on other shows that you'd hear their notifications off their Facebook or something like that. And you'd hear it every fucking show, and you're like, really? You can't just fucking turn off the notifications? Anyway, so I, of course, apologize for that. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about tonight is, I guess I will call them millennials, even though I think millennials go up to people in their early 30s. But we'll say the low end of millennials. I don't think you can group like that. Like, and I don't want to really say this, but potentially, I guess I would end up in a millennial based on the age that I say. But say potentially I wouldn't, and I'd end up in a Generation X. But I think they put Generation X from like 1960 to 1980. How can you possibly do that? Because people that grew up in the 1980s do not have anywhere near the same experiences as the people that grew up in the 1960s. I mean, maybe you could put a 10-year period. You can do it by decades. And that's where I do see differences in the beginning of the millennials, because that's essentially my fiance and her friends are the first millennials. When I say beginning, meaning that they're the older millennials, as opposed to the younger millennials, like, you know, I will guess kids in, I don't know if kids in high school right now or just kids in college are considered millennials. I mean, if they do it over a 20-year period, then you would say probably kids in high school would be the end of the millennials. So like the kids that are starting in high school now are the youngest millennials, and the older ones are in their early 30s. So I also want to talk about the quote-unquote millennials and their values and how I mean, I guess you could kind of see the change coming if you look at Generation X, sort of, but there's a big change in millennials, I think, compared to the last few generations. So I want to talk about that. I think that there's more of a lack of work effort, ambition, innovation, things like that. I mean, and that's a generalization. You do have, I think, a certain amount that are total innovators when it comes to technology, and they're the ones that are doing a lot for technology. But I think that's a small percentage, and outside of that, I think you have more of a generation that's I want everything handed to me generation, and that's why you see the support for people like Bernie Sanders, because they're expecting everything to be handed to them. We'll also talk about these street lamps, which were mentioned by Alex Jones about 2 or 3 years ago. But now they're being mentioned. I think it was on Alex Jones again, actually. I'm going to play the clip. But they actually go into them and they can listen to you and record you with both video and audio. And I don't really stand anywhere outside any fucking way. So that doesn't mean that I don't care, because I still do care about things like that are happening. But I'm just saying that I don't know that it is affecting me directly, but it still affects me. And where exactly they're putting them, I thought they had mentioned downtown. And there was even this guy who kind of turned out to be a douchebag at first. When I saw some of his videos, I agreed with him, but then I saw more of them and saw how he was a religious freak, and he's part of the Independent American Party, this Vander Beek. And he actually went and opened, after Alex Jones had mentioned it, he went and opened a light or something and said, look, there's nothing in there. And I think that might have been the point where they were building them, but they didn't finish them yet, where they had set them up so you could put these cameras and microphones and those type of things in there, but they hadn't finished them yet. And we do have cameras, of course, everywhere, every stoplight, but you can see them and you know they're there. To have, and that's not okay neither. I remember in 2001 when I started to notice cameras, and they weren't everywhere yet. And I was like flipping out. I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, they're putting cameras on all of these intersections. They can't do that shit. And I went to, I had a business law class for my MBA. And of course, you know, at the time, I only knew so much about law. I took a law class in like 10th grade, but I mean, we didn't learn all that much, I guess, in that class, and that was years before. But before that, I don't think I learned about the expectation of privacy and how laws regarding privacy, that's what it is based on. But my whole issue with that was there's a difference, because you have the expectation of privacy from the government. So even though you don't have an expectation of privacy from other people, you have an expectation of privacy from the government filming you and having a record of what you're doing. Because I know right away somebody could say, well, the police can be driving by and see what you're doing. But they wouldn't have a record, a documented record of it. And that's where, in my opinion, it would be a violation of privacy. But, of course, in this country and this government, you know, they can do whatever they want, and they would just ignore that anyway. But I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to play some of the UCLA shooting videos that we have, because I have a few, and get some more information on that. And this was a huge thing. And somebody made a comment on the radio it was like one of those, on the local radio station, they have a guy who does like the, 2-minute comment or whatever. And he mentioned there were 69 murders in Chicago over the weekend, and no ATF, no FBI, and you had one professor who was killed and somebody who committed suicide. And I love how they say 2 people murdered. That pisses me off more than anything. The fact that the person who committed the murder, they count them as a murder victim to inflate the count. Everything's so political and so much about exploiting things to get your agenda across. It's just, I don't know how people fucking deal with it sometimes. It's just like, how do you and the people that are involved in it, that how you can look yourselves in the fucking mirror and how you can get up every day and fucking sit there and have any self-respect at all. I don't know. So anyway, we're going to play some of these clips and we will be back. If you'd like to call in, 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or you can call in via Skype. Just send a contact request to Nonpartisan Liberty for All, one word. And if you forget any of that information, it's all at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Also, if you'd like to donate to the show, we do have a donation page. So I would appreciate any donation. I don't necessarily think that I don't want to say I don't deserve a donation. Like, don't give me one. I don't deserve it. But I mean, in a way of I don't expect it just because I take the time to put together a show. That's my choice. And I'm putting that out there. And if I can do a show that makes you want to give me money, then give me money. If I can't, then obviously I'm not doing a good enough show and I don't deserve the money. So, and I appreciate anything, even if it's $1, that's fine. I would say even if it's change, but I don't think, as I had mentioned yesterday, that you can give less than $1. It was something with the decimal points. So I'm not sure. You can try to, give 25 cents or something, but I don't know that it, plus if you want to fuck the credit card company, because that's like what it costs for a transaction. So any donation is greatly appreciated. So we'll be right back. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com, and I'm your host, Dave Bourne. We'll be right back.
Tonight, investigators are still piecing together just what happened in this building on the campus of UCLA. Police say shortly after 10 this morning, they responded to 911 calls from witnesses reporting gunshots in Building 4 of the UCLA engineering facility. As police responded in force, the campus was put on lockdown, shutting down streets and paralyzing parts of Los Angeles. Inside, terrified students barricaded doors, hiding from what they were told could be an active shooter.
When people are crying, people are nervous, they're shaking, and every 2 minutes we hear that there's another shooter at a different location. And sometimes it sounds like it's moving closer to us.
Another student said she was hiding under a table in the library with about 50 others.
Currently, we have all the lights off, our windows are blocked, we had a crowbar on the door.
As city and campus police, along with the FBI, began searching the scene, sources say they found 2 bodies, but were not clear if there was still a suspect on the loose.
Our tactical teams are going in with SWAT.
As helicopters hovered above, heavily armed SWAT officers surrounded buildings, moving in formation down alleys, eventually sweeping into buildings across campus, all captured on security cameras. Hours later, police say they no longer believed anyone was at large, but continued to clear buildings, canceling classes for the rest of the day.
There's no evidence to support outstanding suspects at this point, but we are, out of an abundance of caution, going to continue our search.
Now, police are now saying they believe this was a murder-suicide. No word yet on the identity of the shooter or of the victim or of the motive for this incident. Police would also not answer whether a suicide note was found.
Hey, everybody, here's some breaking news out of California. According to NBC News, they state that the UCLA college campus was placed on lockdown after a shooting occurred in the engineering laboratory. Now, the UCLA newsroom sent out a notice by tweet stating that the campus is on immediate lockdown. And they also go on to state here by NBC that there's at least 2 victims. And that is via the university. But their conditions are not immediately known. A campus-wide lockdown after it was put in place. I guess a search was on by the police to investigate a possible shooter, and a gunman may very well still be on the loose. But, of course, the information is not clear, nor has this story been updated as of yet. It just materialized here in the past 10 minutes. So that is what's coming out of UCLA. Let's see here. Here are some of the pictures here from the UCLA campus. As you can see, they have fire and ambulance rescue on scene. According to some of the people that were running and getting out of the area, there was somebody pointing a big gun and said for everyone to run and get out of the area. The shooting in the Building 4 put nearby Ronald Reagan Medical Center on lockdown as well. A nurse there said the hospital had not yet received any patients from the shooting. Here is where you get interesting, okay? FBI and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms were responding to the incident at the request of the LAPD. Really? Really? That's how they do it now. Oh, let's just call in the feds because, you know what, we have this big agency called the Los Angeles Police Department and we can't handle it on our own. Like I stated, keep your eye on any event where the FBI, ATF, and, well, let's just see if the Department of Homeland Security makes a special appearance as well. But officials told NBC News they had no independent information of anything yet. Of course not. This is one of those stories where nothing's known except for what the media puts out or what they're told to put out for an exercise. And then, of course, it'll all be screwed up later on, just like Sandy Hook, where, oh, I spoke to, the nurse, and she said that the mother worked there as a teacher. Yeah, okay. And we know how much BS that turned out to be, right? So we'll keep an eye on this because I want to see footage of who is there and what is going on. All right. Thanks, everybody.
We begin tonight with those 2 hours of terror at UCLA in Los Angeles. Authorities say a shooter taking deadly aim and then killing himself, triggering a massive lockdown. Heavily armed police flooding the hallways and the buildings on campus, searching from room to room for the gunman. Students trapped inside, and you can see them setting up makeshift barricades with whatever they could find. The students who were outside were told to get down and put their hands up as their backpacks were then searched one by one this afternoon. Tonight, authorities have not released the name of the suspect, but there is word of a note possibly left behind. And ABC's Kana Whitworth is on the scene for us.
Tonight, new details in a deadly shooting that paralyzed UCLA's campus and sent students running for cover.
Around 10 o'clock this morning, a report of a shooting occurred here on the UCLA campus.
Tonight, ABC learning the victim of that apparent murder-suicide was William S. Klug, a professor of engineering. Shots ringing out just after 10 a.m.
Conducting a search for the active shooter.
Hundreds of officers swarm the area. Fears of a possible gunman on campus. Thousands of students told to shelter in place, dozens trapped inside that building.
I heard somebody yell, "Everybody run, escape, run." And then I heard commotion in the crowd. People were saying they saw an assault rifle.
Some barricading themselves inside, propping tables against doors, tying printer cords to door handles, using belts, anything they could find to stay safe.
We just bolted out of there and ran up to the 7th floor of one of the buildings and then hid in the bathroom for like an hour and a half.
Due to a major incident in West LA Division, the city is on technical alert status.
SWAT teams seen inside the hallway of this building on surveillance cameras going door to door. Officers finding 2 male victims with gunshot wounds, a gun, and a note found nearby. After 2 hours of chaos, each student is cleared one by one, told to drop to their knees with their hands up. A final search by police.
And Kana Whitworth is with us live tonight. Kana, what are investigators telling you?
Well, David, I just was able to speak with them, and they're telling me their next step here is to figure out who this shooter is. They will be searching their apartment and scrubbing their social media accounts. And in the meantime, this engineering building behind me remains a crime scene. David.
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and we are back. This whole fucking the lockdowns, and they showed the clips literally of everybody had to put their hands behind their head and get searched like they were the criminals. And it's, again, we're talking about a school of 40,000 kids or people, and you get the FBI, the ATF, why there's an ATF, I still don't know. And this is just fucking out of hand as far as I'm concerned. Even saying that they didn't know, I guess it's plausible to not know if there's another gunman, but to not know that the 2 people they found, who shot who and who committed suicide, it does not take you long to figure that out. In fact, I would think you could figure that out pretty easily. But the fact that, okay, it's possible that there could be other shooters, but do they do that in other, I mean, the way they handle these school shootings, and I saw a video that was, they do, this is even more fucking ridiculous, that in high schools, they do drills. And I was looking at a drill that they did that they had videotaped, and they have students lock themselves in the room, get like under the desk, and it's like, that's to me what not to do. I would get the fuck out of there. And especially in a school with UCLA, in a school that big, they're locking students inside the school. They're saying shelter in place and all of this shit. Like, are you fucking kidding me? If I was in college right now, and this is partially because of what the fucking government does, not because of what the being scared of a shooter, but it would be for both. I would fucking bring a gun with me. Fuck it. And then if there was a shooter, I'd just fucking take them right out. And then probably what would happen, I would get charged with a crime for having a gun on school property. And then they would probably suspect me having something to do with it or something. It's insane. So we're going to get back to this story later in the show, because I want to talk about these lockdowns and this, because they apply the same thing throughout schools. And really the difference between schools and any other place, really, any other public place, or why even have it specific to public places? Why not apply the same mentality at, people's houses? I mean, this is just nuts. I don't know. I don't know what they, I wish I knew more about what they did after the shooting at University of Texas in the 60s, where a guy got a rifle and got on like some clock tower type thing. I don't know. I think clock tower because I'm thinking of Back to the Future and save the clock tower. But he killed 20 people. It's still like in the top 10 of the amount of people killed. It might even be in the top 5. So I love when they say how, this is becoming more, happening more often and things like that. And it is happening more often, but again, when it comes to shootings that are personal, that they're actually going after one person. They're not just going to shoot up a school because they want to shoot up a public place because they're nuts. There's not much of a difference between that and any other shooting of someone that was targeted. And that's where they're getting a lot of their stats from as well. And it's crazy how they're able to exploit them and, just add them in. But I remember when I was a kid, I'd hear about shootings in, I think a lot more times people didn't die. Maybe that's why. I don't know. But I remember hearing about shootings all the time in the bad areas of Boston. So I don't know if they buried a lot of the history on these, like they never happened, because I guess if it happens in a bad neighborhood, then, it doesn't count. So anyway, we'll get back to that and we'll talk more about lockdowns and how they compare to targeted shootings compared to just mass shootings with lunatics, and how the mass shootings are actually very rare if you separate them. But for now, I wanted to talk about our favorite generation, millennials. And I guess the name comes from the year 2000, the millennial, is that what they called it? The millennium. I'm an idiot. Wasn't there a movie, Millennium Man, with Robin Williams, where he was a robot or something? So you have now Bernie Sanders, feel the burn and get your arm burned off. I mean, there should be, and maybe there is, and people just haven't put it out there, but some, I guess, come back to that, the feel the burn, because it's more like the you'll get burned. Or feel the burn until your hand burns off. But a lot of these kids are the ones who are supporting Bernie Sanders. And it's funny in this respect, or this regard, that, 4 years ago, it was not necessarily the same people, but a lot of young people supporting Ron Paul. So where's the, Are the people that supported Ron Paul, are they supporting Bernie Sanders now? Do they just go for the kind of alternative candidate, the one who's different, the one who is supposedly the outsider? And obviously we've seen that with fucking Donald Trump, who I can't stand and who's just an arrogant ass. But as I said, it doesn't matter who gets elected president because it's all controlled and your vote doesn't mean anything. So if Trump gets elected president, it's because he made a deal with the powers that be to go along with their agenda. And if he doesn't go along with their agenda, then he's not going to be around too much longer, or his family's not going to be around, or, you know, there'll be a plane crash with his daughter in it or something like that. I mean, there's so many ways to get rid of somebody and make it look like an accident when you're part of the government and have access to the flow and control of information. So if people don't go along, you know, they can just get rid of their families or get rid of them. You know, heart attack. When you're 69 years old, I mean, a heart attack is not a is something that is, I forgot the word I was looking for, but it's not something uncommon for somebody 69 years old to have a heart attack, or even somebody 69 years old to die in their sleep or something. I mean, he's getting up there. Of course, he gets the best doctors and treatment and all of that, but you know, that's pretty old. And I believe Hillary's the same age. So what does that mean? They're both 69 there. So I believe it's going to be, and I'm not going to talk too long about this, just for a minute, but I believe it's going to be Hillary, because I believe the deal was made back in 2008 that she would be the next president, and Donald Trump is just the court jester of the whole fucking thing to make it interesting. But I think when it comes down to it, it will be Hillary. They will continue to push their agenda, and your freedoms, whatever freedoms you have left, which aren't a lot, will continue to go away. And even if you have Trump, and he's even fucking said it, this is what I don't get. He's even come out. It's not like Trump came out and supported, hey, we need to stop the NSA from spying on people, and we need to bring freedom back. And no, he was just the opposite. The only thing about him is that, well, he's going to bring jobs, they think, and he's different. First of all, it's not the government's job to bring in jobs anyway. It's the government's job to create an atmosphere where they're not interfering so other people can create jobs. But they're falling into this, it's like this trap of Trump, like believing this bullshit. But I'll probably do another show about him before the election in November, and it's coming up. I mean, fuck, it's July already. I mean, sorry, June already. And, you know, 5 months is the election, almost exactly 5 months, because I believe, let me look at the calendar here, because it's on, I think it's always the first Tuesday in November, I believe, which would be the 1st. So maybe it's the second Tuesday, because that would be the 8th. So, yeah, it's about 5 months. Yeah, Charlie Babbitt. Yeah. So millennials, and this is, I remember talking with Ken Shorgen, who is a writer or it's his website, The Daily Economist, who joins us every other Wednesday. And he was talking about kids in Japan, how they don't give and it's surprising because it's Japan. And watch the movie Gun Ho, or if you ever seen the movie Gun Ho, where they bring over a team from Japan to take over a car manufacturer of, I think it's of Japanese cars. So they had the plant open and it got shut down, and then they reopened it with the Japanese, and of course they wanted to do things their way, and Michael Keaton was in it, and he lied about some stuff to get them to produce a certain amount of cars. But they had a certain way of doing things, and they talked about how the company comes first, and they feel ashamed if they don't meet their company goals. It was pretty fucked up because there was no balance between a social life and a job. And like when the guys talked, all the women went away except Michael Keaton's girlfriend in the movie, who was played by Mimi Rogers, Tom Cruise's ex-wife. And they, I think, got in a fight over it or something. Not that that's relevant to anything I'm saying. But the point being was that was supposed to, I don't know how close that came to Japanese culture, but I would imagine that it was based on Japanese culture, that they were more about the company and the company doing well and being dedicated to the company than not necessarily then caring about their kids or their wife, but that it was they'd work extra hours if they had to meet their deadlines, and they'd be very dedicated, and they'd miss important family things if they had to. And it was all about work and putting in the hard work, and it being a sense of pride. And I'm not saying people should be like that, because even within the U.S., culture has totally changed in the past 30 years or something regarding jobs and corporations, where they don't give a fuck about you neither. What it comes down to is with corporations, it's, it's a Janet Jackson song. What have you done for me lately? They'll fire you in a second. Like it's nothing. And, we've done shows talking about, or just talked about it in general, about corporations, and not just corporations, but businesses in general, and how there's no allegiance there on either side. And years ago, people would work their whole life with one company, and that company would have some loyalty to the employee. And now it's like they really don't. Now, depending on, I guess, who you're working for specifically, and I'm not talking about the corporation, I'm talking about your boss and their bosses and the people that you work with that are in a position of power. They might be better to you than, say, at another corporation, but it only goes so far. If you have too many problems, you're done. They're not gonna, there's all these laws now too, because I'm thinking of, people that get whatever, you get cancer or something, or you get some kind of long-term illness or whatever. But that's not really what I was talking about. It's more, what have you accomplished for them, or what have you done for them as far as helping the company, or depending on what your job is, helping in upping production or cutting costs, or, again, it all depends on what your position is. But if you haven't done something for them for a long time, even though you may have done all these things over the years, it doesn't matter. They'll fire you in a second. And people should be the same way, not in that, I've always given 2 weeks and that's kind of the standard. The company, of course, won't give you 2 weeks, but I've always given 2 weeks if I'm going to leave a job. But that's about it, because I know that there's no loyalty to me. And usually if I'm leaving, that's one of the reasons, is because they're not doing me right, where they're maybe treating me badly or screwing me over or whatever it may be. So that whole, I think, generation is done. Now it's, you switch from job to job. You may even have different careers. I mean, you may go through your life with 2 or 3 different actual careers, meaning different types of jobs that are totally different. So you have that as well, where it's not just the amount of time you work for a company, it's also the type of job that you have, where you go from, I don't know, say somebody is an accountant and then they end up a mailman. I don't know. I'm just pulling fucking ideas just out of nowhere. But I mean, the point being that those are really totally different careers. So, and people are going to school later in life, not just later in life when they never went, but also going back later in life. So you have people that are going to school for the first time later in life, and you have people that are going back to school that have already, went to school and got degrees because of whatever changes they are making in their career. And I guess this is more about careers as well as it is and jobs about millennials. But I want to focus on the millennials because they're the ones kind of starting out there. So one of the articles that I found that was interesting. And first, let me say in general, as I was saying, or let me reiterate this, and this is just as generalization, so I'm not trying to offend anybody, so please don't get offended. And this is with everybody when you're young as well. Who wants to fucking work, and especially work a shit job, because usually your first job out of college is not going to be the greatest job, or even, like I took a year off from high school. So my first job out of high school, first I worked at a place that recycled bottles and cans, and they had bugs in them, and it was nasty. Not all of them, but some of them. And what we would do when I worked during the day, because sometimes I would work like I think like an 11 to 8 shift or something like that, where during the day, a lot of times we'd unload trucks. And I'm talking like these big, long fucking trucks. And on the trucks were bags of just bottles, like empty bottles, like empty Coke bottles, like 2-liter bottles. And there was no air conditioning. And this was the summer when I worked there, because it was right after high school. So it was like June in Massachusetts, where there's a lot of humidity during the summer. And we would just empty out these big, long trucks. And then after that, we would open the bags and just dump them into this conveyor thing. And then the conveyor would, smush them together. And you get these big blocks of plastic. And I don't know what the fuck they did with them, but it was a recycling place. I should have kind of said that at the beginning. But it would squish them together, and you get like blocks of plastic, although they weren't even totally squished. I don't know how they were able to do anything with them. And then at night, we'd break glass. So, and I at least got to listen to, that was back when I had tapes. But I would buy, a couple tapes like a week, and I would just listen to music. Or some of the other people working there were around my age, I was only 17, and around my age or a couple years older. And, I would talk to them or listen to music. And the guys at night were older, because they were usually guys that were trying to save up some money. One of them actually told me, I totally forgot about this, how he used to be a big Coke dealer. It was kind of funny, actually. But anyway, at night, we would take the glass bottles, and it would be like one of those big things you dump your trash in, and we would just dump the glass bottles in there so they'd break. So it was kind of cool, because you just whip fucking bottles in there and smash them and whatever. And I think at the time, I got $5 an hour, and I ended up getting fired from that job because these girls that my friend knew, he was sort of seeing, because she had a boyfriend, one of the girls there, and she had a friend, and I ended up dating her friend later. And I left with them one day and said I was sick, and then the next day they fired me. So then I ended up getting a job at pizza place. So that's what I was thinking of before. The pizza place was the what do you call it again? No, I can't think of the name. The recycling place. So anyway, and luckily I got out of there in 3 months and then worked at a liquor store, and that was a pretty good job for being 18, and it was a lot more money. It was $7.50 an hour, and at the time, not having any bills, it was pretty good. But anyway, then I had went to school in September. The point being that, out of high school and even out of college, it wasn't all that great neither. Not that it was as bad as that. I had an office job at least. But you're not going to be the fucking CEO just because you went to college, or even if you went to a really good school. There are things you're going to have to do to work your way up. And there are things you're going to have to do that you don't want to do if you want to accomplish anything. So what it seems like is that the millennial generation, And I always got labeled for that too, by the way. Not that I need to talk about this, but my father would always blame me for somebody that was this type of person, that not having the ambition and not having the work effort and all of that. And that was bullshit. I was pretty shy. And my problem was it made it harder for me to get a job because I stuck to my principles. I had braids in my hair and stuff like that. And I was a rebel. I was always a rebel. So it was hard for me to get a job anyway. And then at the same time, I was shy. But it wasn't that I wasn't willing to work hard, because I was. And I did later in my life when I had the opportunity. But being shy and not being able to create that opportunity and being held back by sticking to my principles and standing up for them, has always held me back my whole life. So, but to me, I can't be anybody else. I can't sit there. I mean, I can do it. And for a little while, I think I did, be the whole corporate guy and all of that, but it's not me. And I work at a corporation now. I'm not going to go into the details, and I have a corporate job and all of that, but I wouldn't consider myself Mr. Corporate guy. And I'm sure I could be a lot further along in my career if I were to do certain things to show them, I guess, or act a certain way in a more corporate kind of way and give up who I am to a certain extent. I do what I have to do to get by, because you can't just, there's certain things you got to do when you're in a corporate environment. That's just how it is. However, there's only so far that I go. And if I tried to go a lot further, which I could act that way and play that part, but it's not me. And I don't know, I wouldn't want to every day be disgusted with myself for not being, who I am, and sitting there kissing this person's ass and this person's ass and all of that shit. And it's basically either who you know or whose ass you kiss or those type of things when it comes to corporations. And I'm not going to say the corporation I work for is like that or it's a bad place or anything like that, but I'm just talking in general. So anyway, in general, I think a lot of the millenniums that they don't seem to have that work effort or ambition or want to be innovators or and also that they need to be controlled and have structure, and it's like they want to be told what to do by the government and have things handed to them, and that's where the whole Bernie Sanders thing comes in. It's either they don't really understand, and that's possible, they don't understand what he's trying to do, or they do understand what he's trying to do and they support it. And that's dangerous, because if you have more people, there's a difference between being brainwashed or being misled and not understanding, and totally understanding but believing in those principles. There's a big difference. So again, I'm making a generalization. It doesn't apply to every single millennial. And again, I think that fortunately that there are a lot of millennials that are very ambitious in the technology field and do a lot with that. And those are the people that are going to be the next generation of innovators and developing a new generation of software and different types of automation and those types of things. But as I was saying, there's this article that I had come across, and it's 8 myths about millennials at work. And then I have two things. From Forbes, I have 5 things every boss should know about working with millennials. And then I have 8 myths about millennials at work that need to die. That's a kind of fucked up way to put it. And I wonder who wrote that. On the other one, it has a bibliography about biography about the person. This just says her name, but it doesn't say much about her. I'm trying to look for information about her just to see if she's actually a millennial herself, which I'd have to look her up because there's no information. There is about the other author of the other article, so I'll look at that and read what information it gives about her. But so 8 myths about millennials at work that need to die. Jesus. It says millennials may not be the most overanalyzed generation in history, but there are some ideas that we can put to rest for good. Now, of course, this is a total opinion piece by Stephanie Volza, and this is from December of 2015, so pretty recent. So it goes through an introduction about entitled Tech-Driven Job Hoppers. It says that's how some people might describe millennials. But Brad Harrington was tired of hearing those stereotypes. I guess those are the stereotypes that they're hearing. As executive director of Boston College Center for Work and Family, he works closely with millennials, many of whom are completing undergraduate degrees and pursuing MBAs. So I'm not going to read the whole article here. I'm just going to go through their 8. Sorry, my contacts are like getting stuck to my eyes here. I'm just going to go through their list of 8. So the first one is they job hop. And really, you can't, it takes a while to really establish if you do. But it says one of the statistics here is that, in fact, 60% of millennials say they plan to stay in their jobs to advance versus 25% who want to get ahead by moving from employer to employer. Well, that's just what they're saying. But it says millennials have a reputation for not staying at a job longer than 12 to 18 months. So that's just based on what they're saying. I don't know how that proves any myth. It's just saying that millennials plan to stay at their jobs. That's 60% plan to stay there versus 25%. And really, you never know until you get there. It's always good to stay at a job for at least a year when you're getting out of college. Vegas is different. So it may be, when it comes to other cities, more time. But Vegas, because you have so many people that move here, it's a transient type of town. I mean, I've been here 15 years. I think officially 15 and a half years now. So for me, when they look at my resume, being at a job for a couple years is a positive thing. Although all the jobs that I have been at, I've been at more than 2 years, and the last 3 jobs were one was 2.5, and that was only because they closed the office and I got laid off, and the other 2, including the one I'm in currently, were at least 4.5 years. My other job was 4.5 years. The job I'm in now, I've been there, what will it be, 5.5 years in July, and it will be 4 years in my current position in July. So after 4 years in my current position, it's time to move up at least. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. That's a whole nother. That's not something for a show. Myth 2, they favor technology over in-person communication. Now that's probably true. As somebody that is still somewhat shy, not as shy as I was, obviously, although even though I'm on quote unquote the radio because it's on the internet, you know, I'm not seeing anybody I'm talking to. So, but at the same time, there are a lot of people that are shy, and there are a lot of people that their shyness will keep them off the radio. Even though, you know, they're not seeing those people, they know that it's going out to a certain amount of people, and that essentially on the internet, the whole world has access to it. Now, of course, I don't know what percentage of the world is listening. I don't know how many decimals you'd have to go. Maybe like, you know, 100, like 100 zeros and then a 1. If not more than that, maybe 1,000. But you do have that ability to pretty much reach, maybe not the whole world, because not everybody has internet access, but the majority of the world. But I favor technology over in person as well, to be honest. It depending on what it is, but if it has to do with work, I do. Although there is a benefit to in-person communication, or over the phone at least communication, and I think that people shouldn't forget about the importance of that, because it helps you to get to know somebody, and building good relationships are essential at work. Now, whether I've actually practiced that or not, that's a whole nother story. But building good relationships are essential at work. So it is important, and it could be the whole difference between your career being successful somewhere and it not. And I'm not talking about because you email all the time instead of call people. I'm just talking about relationships. Could be the difference between having a successful career somewhere compared to not having a successful career. It's all, relationships go very far when it comes to your career, not only at the place you're at as well, because a lot of people that are younger don't think about the future and what's going to happen. And later, you know, when you're looking for a job, if you have a good relationship with somebody from your last job, then you could go to that person. You want to have good relationships with as many people as possible. So when you are looking for something, you know, you could possibly go to those people, as well as the advancement of your career at your current job that the more relationships or better relationships you have, the better. And it's easier. Maybe easier is not the way to describe it, but it is easier because when you're writing an email, it's not as personal. It's, even in the writing of an email, it's hard to tell the tone, that's why I use emoticons a lot, I guess, if that's what you're calling them, or smiley faces or whatever, because I want to emphasize the fact that I'm joking or smiling when I'm saying something or whatnot, because I don't want something to be misconstrued. And that has happened before, and it is not a good thing. So they're saying that that's a myth, that they actually favor technology over in-person communication. So I actually want to read this because I'm surprised at that and what their reasoning or rationale for that is. It says, while millennials are more heavily immersed in technology and know how to better utilize it than other generations, Harrington says that doesn't make them people averse. What was interesting was when we asked how they found their most recent position, instead of saying social media like we expected, the number one answer was that they were referred by a friend, relative, or another connection. He says they are using the tried and true method of networking. Well, that still doesn't mean that they favor, just because they were referred to a job by a friend or a relative. They could have referred them through a fucking email or a text as well. So I don't know that really says anything as far as them favoring technology over in person. Number 3, their parents have a big impact on their careers. I never really would have thought that anyway, although I think I know where it comes from. And yes, I was going to say, it says millennials are often thought of being entitled because they've been raised by helicopter parents. And I was just going to say that yes, that I know where that comes from, that the parents of millennials, a lot of them are thought of more hovering, more controlling, and more you can't do this or you can't do that, or being more worrisome about what they're doing. And this is funny because, and I don't think that would have any impact on their careers, to be honest. But, well, it may from the standpoint of, I can get you a job or something like that through one of my friends, meaning their parents could have got them a job. But this is an interesting point because we've talked about helicopter parents on the show, and the negative side, which I see it only as a negative side when it comes to helicopter parents, because when it comes to freedom, which is what we're all about, helicopter parents are not pro-freedom, at least when it comes to the way they parent their kids. Now, you could have parents, and I've seen this before, that believe in the principles of freedom and liberty, but are still not parents that follow those principles in the way that they parent their kids, which is unfortunate. And it says here, we've heard ludicrous stories of parents attending job interviews We wanted to know if that was true, so we asked about career success makers and had them rate 13 things. My parents' expectations was by far the lowest scoring. The idea that all millennials want to make mom and dad happy isn't the case. And I wouldn't think that neither. I think that regardless of how you're parented, that is more of an elite thing than anything else, I would think. I wouldn't put that as a how you were parented thing. I would put that as if your parents are considered part of the elite, or what I call the semi-elite, I guess, meaning, not part of the 1%, not like that, but that have pretty good careers and went to good schools and all of that. That's where I would think the parents would have impact on their careers. But outside of that, just because they've been raised by helicopter parents, and again, the definition of helicopter parents, I don't believe I mentioned, but I have before on the show, is, the hovering, because they are so controlling, and not just controlling, but more worrisome, and want to make sure that they're okay, and that whole thing. But there's not a bigger amount of elites as far as the millennial generation compared to Generation X or any other generation. So being that I think of it that way, that's not a quote unquote myth or a preconceived notion that I would have. But since we're talking about helicopter parents, since this mentions helicopter parents, this does give me the opportunity to briefly mention them, which is good, because, and I know one that I work with, and she probably knows that maybe she's letting go because her son's in college now, and she wouldn't get mad at me for saying this anyway, but but it was more he's an only child and they grew up close and that type of thing. So, it's understandable. I don't know as far as the controlling part, and that's really the part that is dangerous, because I've talked about parents bringing kids up and bringing them up in a way of, these are the rules, this is how it is, you follow them or you get punished. And then when they turn 18, getting turned over to the government and their rules and laws. And that scares me. And that's one of when I think about the most important things relating to freedom that could be done to greatly increase freedom, that would be one of them, is the taking kids out of government schools and the peaceful parenting and the radical unschooling and all of those type of things, where you bring your kid up to think independently, to have that freedom. And I don't think every single kid that is brought up that way is going to turn out to support true freedom and liberty. But I believe that a large percentage, I would say, I want to say in the 90s, just because being trying to be optimistic in at least one area, but there are also people that rebel against their parents. But I mean, what is there to rebel against, really? I guess there's freedom to rebel against, and saying that, no, I think this should be, people should be watched when it comes to this, or they should be controlled, or there should be more laws. So I guess there's a rebelling that takes place. But if you raise them in that way, I think it raises them totally different, where they wouldn't have a reason to rebel, nor would they want to rebel. And that's where I think that raising your kids without discipline and being, and don't get me wrong, for people who haven't heard this before, it's not just like letting your kids out there and having nothing to do with them, meaning, oh, just go do this and who cares. It's being more involved, definitely having a stay-at-home parent, and being involved in every aspect of their lives, but giving them freedom to make their own decisions in all of those aspects of their lives, and being more of a friend. And I know people say, well, you're their parent, not their friend. But I think it's being more of a friend than a parent, or a parent / friend, because you have a life experience to help them that way, but not to force it on them, and not to force what you want on them, to let them make their own decisions. So that, if I was making a list, and I will do this at some point and do a show on it, of the most important things when it comes to freedom. Now, this is one that would be long term, obviously, because it would be from the time that people start raising their kids that way, or a large majority of people start raising their kids that way. So I don't know, if you were to look at it now, I mean, what percentage are raising their kids that way? And I don't think it's a high percentage at all. I do think it's going more in a direction where it's kind of mixed, where you have these helicopter parents, but at the same time, I don't think you have as many parents that are hitting their kids, or that are abusing their kids. So I think in that sense, they may grow up more adjusted to an extent. However, they're not going to have a propensity towards wanting to be free and fighting for freedom and standing up for freedom. So until we get to that point, plus you have government schools, government media, all of these things right in their face. So it's like you have everything against us. Well, I'm not a parent, but, you know, I consider myself part of the movement of parents, of peaceful parenting and free range parenting, or there's a lot of names for it. So I'm a big advocate of it. And if I do have kids, that will be the way that I raise my kids. Although it's it would be hard for me to be a actual advocate in the sense of going out and talking to people and trying to tell them about, I mean, I can talk about it on the show, which I would, but I know that a lot of people would say, well, you don't have kids, so what do you know? And that's why I use actual studies, or not studies, but actual examples like Dana Martin, like Stefan Molyneux, although I don't think he goes far enough, and some others that have raised their kids this way. So I use them as examples, and also use a lot of their ideas, because I'm looking at it more of learning from them more of the specifics. So being somebody who has always been a rebel, has always been someone who stood up to my parents and all of that, these are things that principles that I've always believed in, but they are actually going through it and talking about a lot about the execution of how they do things, which if I do have kids, it would be very helpful, as opposed to you have the majority of books on parenting are more about raising your kids to be slaves of the government. So 4, they follow the gender roles of their parents. And I don't know exactly what they mean by that, so let me read this. I'll read it out loud, because otherwise I'm just reading it in my head anyway. Millennials are less likely to be bound by gender roles than their predecessors. In fact, 51% of men said they would consider staying home if their spouse's income was inadequate, while just 44% of women said they would want to stay home. The results run contrary to the likely gendered response, suggesting it may be time to drop assumptions about both men and women's roles in family life to support the co-parenting narrative. So I guess it's saying that their parents, whether their parents were of the roles of the man works and the woman doesn't, or they both work or whatever, they're not necessarily going to follow that. However, that really doesn't make a lot of sense, because I thought the generation that would be their parents were open to those things. So I don't know, that's kind of confusing, because I don't know that it's saying that they're open to that or they're not, that it's making the assumption that their parents weren't open to things like the man staying home and the woman working, because I thought they were. So that's kind of hard to really clarify. 5, they did the minimum required, or they do the minimum required. When asked how much effort they give beyond what is considered normal, 80% of the millennials in the study answered a great deal of effort beyond what's expected. I guess it didn't say anything about a study, but I guess there was a study here. But again, just because they say that they do more, that doesn't really mean much to me. And there's a big difference between doing more in school and in a school-like setting and doing more when it comes to work, an actual job. There's a big difference there. 6, they believe their career is the greatest measure of success. And that So it's saying the myth is that they believe that. I wouldn't think they'd believe that anyway, to be honest, that millennials would believe that. I would think it would be the opposite, that the myth would be that their career is not the greatest measure of their success, that millennials would judge their success in different ways, in how happy they are, or in how, I don't know, just things other than their career. And let me just read a little of this so I can understand it better. While millennials are willing to work hard, they are not willing to sacrifice their personal life and work balance. And work-life balance was the most important factor in choosing a job. Yeah, so that's what I would have thought. So I don't know why that's a myth, because that's definitely what I would have thought, that they, and that's what I said at the beginning, that they're not willing to work hard. And they're kind of twisting it in a way, because there's a difference between measuring your success based on your career and working hard, because there are times where I think you do sacrifice your personal life for a period of time in order to get ahead, whether it's get ahead job-wise or to save up money to start your own business or to do something like that. So I think there is a time for personal sacrifice, and I don't think that time should be the majority of your life, but I do think that just right away out of college and, okay, I need a work-life balance, and I always will need a work-life balance, and I'm not willing to, sacrifice that for a year in order to get ahead where this will pay off in the future. And that was part of my comments in the beginning. So with that, at least compared to this article, I was totally on point. Myth number 7, they're more socially conscious. And I don't know what that means, but I will read the small paragraph that describes it. While much has been written about the social consciousness of the millennial generation, how much am I helping others and contributing to society? Oh, okay. We're among the lowest ranked items in importance, that they care more about helping other people. Yeah, to be honest, I guess I'm bad when it comes to that, because I don't care more when it comes to random people. And I think a lot of that would stem from things that have happened in my life. So when it comes to people that I really care about, that's one thing. But when it comes to like donating to charities or donating my time to help with a, whatever at an old folks home or something like that, it's not something that that is I guess, concern of mine. And that kind of sounds bad. I mean, the things that, well, one, I mean, I don't have the time to do that with the show. And I mean, that to me is a lot more important and does a lot more, at least it would if I had more listeners, than what I could do to help if I volunteered somewhere. Now, if I was volunteering somewhere to teach people about freedom and liberty, then I would gladly do that. But, that, of course, is my focus of what I'm doing, and I am volunteering my time and doing it. And number 8, they're unwilling to make commitments. And that would be something that I would think would be true, but it's saying that is a myth. So let me read this briefly. Compared to other generations, millennials often have delayed milestones that indicate adult transitions, such as marrying later, having children later, and buying a home later. And I think all those are smart things to do, and that doesn't mean that you're not willing to make commitments neither. And that's what they say. I don't view that as being unwilling to make commitments. So yeah, and it says millennials are staying in school longer. They're buying homes later because the cost of housing is becoming exorbitant. And I think things are going to crash again anyway, so I wouldn't advise people to buy a house now. And I think these differences are explainable. It's not attitudinal, if that's a word or I pronounced it right. Attitudinal. It's often for economic and social reasons. And I would think that they're not willing to make commitments, to be honest, but I do agree with the fact that those are smart things to do, that, getting married too young or having kids too young or buying a home at this point are all things that are not necessarily based on commitments. It's more it can be based on other things. And I think in general that not just the millennial generation, but other generations as well, the Generation X. I don't know if there's a Generation Y, although I think there should be a generation in between the millennials and Generation X, although Generation X should be split up as well. So, I mean, if you're taking like people born from 1960 all the way through 2000 really now, because it's, and you get 2 generations out of that, I would say there's more like 4 generations out of that. But in general, people are getting married later, they're having kids later, and I personally think that's smarter. Now, that's coming from a person who is doing all those things. So, although I did buy a house 10 years ago, a townhouse, and ended up getting rid of it, but as far as getting married and having kids, I'm engaged, but still not married and still don't have kids. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think personally it's smart because you want to do everything you can, and there's only so much you can do to ensure, and you can ensure it, but everything, that's why I said you want to do everything you can to, I guess, try to ensure that the person you're going to be with and the person you have kids with, you're going to be with forever. Now, of course, it doesn't work out that way. there are issues, there are problems, people cheat, people change, whatever. But I think it's something that the more time you put into it, the more time you're with that person before you have kids and get married, you can cut down on the odds, basically. You know, so I think what you're doing in a situation like that is you're cutting down on the odds that things won't work out. And that's really all you're doing. There's no way that you could say this person will, I mean, you could say it, but that this person will never cheat on me, that they'll always be in love with me. You know, people change and things happen. Sorry, I had to get some water there. And I think that, and this water's colder, so I need to get some of this water. And I think that either way, you know, having kids is a bigger commitment than getting married. Unless you're abnormally wealthy and you don't sign a prenup, then that can be very dangerous. But assuming that that's not the case, that having kids with somebody is a lot more serious than getting married. And, you know, once you have kids with somebody, assuming you're always going to be in that kid's life, you know, you're always going to have something to do with the mother or father of that kid. And that's a huge thing. And that's where, for me, you know, when I think about these things, it's like, I want to make sure that I can cut down the odds as much as possible and know somebody as much as possible and weigh all of those things and think about, based on how much I know them, which hopefully, and it already is in the situation I'm in now. I mean, it will be 4 years in September, which is, you know, a long time compared to, especially for older adults, I guess, adults around 30, or at least 30, that most people may have been married by now, especially since we've been engaged. In October, it will be 3 years. So, you know, I want to know as much as possible in making that decision. And as I said, too, the marriage part isn't necessarily as even important as the having kids. And when I say important, what I mean is that, you know, it's more serious. Where I was saying you can marry somebody and get divorced and never see them again. Whereas if you have kids, it's not only the fact that you can get them out of your lives, or you can't get them out of your lives. They're always going to be in your life. But more importantly, it's the what is it going to do to the kid and how is it going to affect the kid, the fact that their parents are divorced. You know, when you think about, it's weird to think about it now compared to when you were a kid. You know, my father's dead, but if my parents would have got divorced when I was 25, I don't know that I would have gave a fuck. But you think about, well, I guess I would have for my mom and stuff, whatever. But meaning that it wouldn't have affected me in a the same way, obviously, when you're a kid, the way that would affect you and how it affects you. So it's not only I don't want to sound like kind of like an asshole, like it's it's the point that I'll still have to have something to do with this person that I don't want to be with anymore, because it may be just that things don't work out, but you still stay friends with that person. It's just, hey, it just, for whatever reason, it didn't work out anymore, that you fell out of love or something like that. And then you have a kid to raise, and you try to make it as, good as possible on the kid, but there's only so much you can do. I mean, that kid is going to be affected by their parents not being together. And it's kind of what I was saying when I said, if my parents got divorced when I was 25, would it have made a difference? And obviously it wouldn't make the same difference, but it's hard to comprehend how that affects a kid thinking of it right now. Thinking of, well, my parents aren't together anymore, and my parents aren't in the same house with me. Like, how that affects a kid, because I can't even comprehend, to be honest. Maybe if my parents would have gotten divorced, I would have been able to obviously comprehend how that made me feel, because I would have experienced it. But since I didn't, I can't comprehend what that does to a kid. Although I do know, I forget the statistics. I know I heard them on Stefan Molyneux, one of his shows, that he had them where there's something like, kids that their parents are divorced. It was either their parents are divorced or the parent isn't in their life, or both. They have a higher arrest rate, or a higher more go to jail. And so there's a definite correlation between father not being around and the effect on the kids. I mean, there's no doubt. And not that anybody said, was walking around saying there wasn't. I don't think anybody thought that, oh yeah, there's no difference when parents get divorced, kids will be fine. And no, whether it's because they blame themselves, or it's because they don't have, usually it's the father there with them in the house, or whether it's a combination of things, which I'm sure it's a combination of things. But I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to go over this Forbes article, the 5 things every boss should know about working with millennials. And then we're going to talk a little more about the lockdowns and the difference between a targeted shooter that happens at a school, or a targeted victim, I guess, that happens at a school, compared to these lunatic mass shooters, which, when you really look at it, there's not, that decreases it by a lot. And they don't tend to try to separate things like that in the government media or politicians, of course, because their main goal is to get guns away from the people. And we know why, because mainly it's a lot easier to take over an unarmed populace than an armed populace. And every dictator and every leader that has taken over a country, it's been one of the first things they have done. So We're going to take a quick break. If you would like to call in, you can call in at 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or Skype into the show at username Nonpartisan Liberty for All with your name and what you want to talk about. And please check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. And you can find all that information there as well as the donation page. And if you'd like to donate, that would be great. I'm going to make a slogan or like a commercial. It would be great if you would like to donate. If you wouldn't like to donate, hey, that's fine as well. I don't expect people to donate, unlike others who believe they are owed money for choosing to do a show. I don't believe you owe me anything because I'm choosing to do a show and put it out there. And if you feel that you are getting something out of it and that you are getting, I just sounded like a pirate kind of there, like you are getting something out of it where you'd like to donate, then that's fine. But if not, that's fine as too. I'm just happy that people are even listening to the show. So we'll be back after this. Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
In a shooting on the campus of UCLA, we have heard reports that have been confirmed by various officials that 2 have been shot. We're still waiting to learn whether there could have been more and what the conditions of those victims might be. We're also waiting to hear a little bit more about the suspect and whether or not there could be multiple suspects or whether they're in custody. And as
I got a note this morning from my friend and brilliant author, historian Harvey Kay, teaches up in Madison, as I recall, Wisconsin. And say what? Green Bay. Thank you. Thank you.
Now let me tell you something no other candidate will tell you. No matter who is elected, that person will not be able to succeed because the power of corporate America, the power of Wall Street, the power of campaign donors is so great. No president alone can stand up to them. The power of corporate America, the power of Wall Street, the power of campaign donors is so great. That is the truth. That is the reality. That is the truth. People may be uncomfortable about hearing it, and that is why what this campaign is about. This campaign is about not just electing Bernie Sanders, it's about creating a grassroots political movement in this country. No matter who is elected, no matter who is elected, who is elected, who is elected, a grassroots political movement in this country.
I got a note this morning from my friend and brilliant author, historian Harvey Kay, teaches up in Madison, as I recall, Wisconsin. And say what? Green Bay. Thank you. Thank you. You got to shout it out, Jim. I only got one ear that works here. The IFB is in the other. Anyhow, this is a piece that he wrote back actually the day before the 4th of July this year. It was July 3rd. And it was published by Bill Moyer's piece. But basically, he goes through all these things that social democracy is, and he says that social democracy is 100% American. And I'm really starting to get concerned. If anybody from the Bernie Sanders campaign is listening, please take what I have to say seriously. You can't, generally speaking, win an election by saying we have to become like another country. You can, however, easily win an election by saying we need to go back to our core principles and values. and we can simply relabel them. Right? I mean, Nixon did this with family values and Jerry Falwell. I mean, there's no shortage of times that we have kind of relabeled terms. The word liberal, I mean, Rush Limbaugh turned the word liberal into a dirty word. It's kind of come back now. Conservative used to be kind of a dirty word. Now it's, who knows? But socialism, and it concerns me that Bernie is saying, okay, democratic socialism, that's like what they have in Denmark. And now I'm, by the way, seeing all over the web all these things about how the Danes commit higher rates of suicide and whatnot. Well, that's true of most of the very far northern countries. It probably has to do with seasonal affective disorder. But, life is generally good. All the indexes of life in Denmark are better. But it's not, we shouldn't be, I personally, this is my own personal opinion. I could be totally wrong. Nobody from the campaign has asked my advice, and so this is completely unsolicited, and it may well be worth exactly what it is. But I think if I was running for president and I was calling myself a democratic socialist, I would say I am a democratic socialist in the fine tradition of Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt said that when capitalism fails, democratic socialism has to step in. And when capitalism refused to hire people, Franklin Roosevelt put them to work through the WPA and the CCC. Franklin Roosevelt pointed out that when capitalism screws workers, that the government has to step in. Democratic socialism has to step in. And he made unions legal and encouraged them. Franklin Roosevelt said that when people in their old age are falling through the cracks of society and dying of starvation and freezing to death in the winter because of poverty, that democratic socialism has to step in and fix that with an old age pension program that we call Social Security, which is one of the purest manifestations of democratic socialism in America. So if you like if you like Social Security, if you like Medicare, if you like Medicaid, that free stuff that Jeb Bush talks about that the Republicans hate, if you like that, you're a democratic socialist. If you like having free roads, not toll roads that are owned by billionaires who are making a profit on them, but if you like free roads, if you like a national transportation system, if you'd like to have a good rail system like we once had, not, you could say like Germany has or Denmark has, but hey, we once had it. I used to live in, Louise and I lived in rural Vermont, out in Northfield, Vermont, and there's a train station. There used to be trains that stopped in every little town. This country was just crisscrossed with railroad tracks and train cars. This was, before automobiles were widely available. This is the late 1800s to the 1930s, 1940s. But we have a long tradition of democratic socialism in the United States. Ben Franklin, for goodness sakes, was a democratic socialist. He created the first public libraries. There's nothing more democratic socialist than that. It's the government saying we're going to take tax dollars and we're going to spend them for the public good. Unfortunately, Bernie's doubling down on his "we want to be like Denmark" thing, and I think this is really, really going to hurt him. Here's what he had to say.
What democratic socialism is about is having a government which reflects the interest of ordinary people rather than is currently the case of the billionaire class. I am Senator Bernie Sanders, and I would love to take your questions. If you look at countries throughout Europe, especially in Scandinavia, you find that healthcare is a right of all of their people, and in fact they do it in a lot more cost-effective way. There is no great debate about the cost of college education in those countries because by and large college education is free. You have in all of those countries workers having significant benefits in terms of pay, vacation time, and medical leave. You have very strong child care systems in all of those countries. And by the way, in most of those countries, the voter turnout is a lot higher than it is in the United States, and they have pretty vigorous democracies. So what democratic socialism means to me is creating a government and policies that work for ordinary people, rather where our political system is dominated by large campaign donors who are working for the very wealthy.
Great. It'll be interesting to see what the response is to it, and it's educational. But again, only 3% of Americans even have passports. I would say there was a time in the United States, and this was my father's generation, when if you had a high school diploma, you had a good job, you had health insurance, you had a pension, you had a retirement, you could buy a house. All of those things are brought to you by democratic socialism in the United States. And Reaganism has been the repudiation of democratic socialism, and it's time to undo Reaganism.
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I believe that was Tom Hartman, because I went back and I tried to take, I didn't try, I did, but I took a couple of Bernie Sanders clips that I had. I thought that was actually, when I grabbed it, Bernie Sanders talking, but I believe it was Tom Hartman's annoying voice. Not annoying, but he's just kind of monotone, and he sounds like Mitt Romney a little. He has that kind of relaxed, like, monotone, I don't know. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I sound like, well, not exactly like that, but I get that monotone fucking sounding voice, and I hate that. I like to be, like, not filled with energy. Like, I don't want, like, to come off like I'm on speed or something. By the way, I have never done speed, but I don't like to come off monotone and that I'm not into what I'm doing, because if you're doing a radio show and you sound like you're not into what you're doing, I don't know how anybody else listening could sound, or not sound, but feel like they can be into what you're saying, because it's kind of if you're into what you're saying, it doesn't mean they'll be into what you're saying, but they definitely won't be into what you're saying if you're not into what you're saying. And you can tell when people aren't into what they're saying, because they'll kind of be like this, and well, that's more like of bad acting, but you know what I mean, when people are more monotone and don't have any emotion or anything. So, but anyway, I'm going to read this other article. We may not have time to get back to what happened at UCLA, although I did cover a lot of that anyway, and I definitely need to get to sleep. I've been having, I'll just put it this way, I've been very tired at work, and I got to make sure I get enough sleep. So I'm trying to balance the writing between between the show, the writing, and working, trying to balance everything out and just make sure, and then exercising as well, which, don't get me wrong, I don't spend that much time exercising, maybe like 15, 20 minutes, but just trying to balance all those things out and get them together. And at the same time, just make sure that I have enough energy and I have enough sleep and I'm alert, because when I'm not, it's just not a good thing. And I don't mean it's not a good thing like I'm mean and I yell at people or something like that. It's just not a good thing to be like half asleep and trying to get things done and all of that. So we'll go through this article, and that will be it for tonight. I also said I was going to talk about the speakers or the light post or lamp posts that have the cameras and microphones in it here in Vegas, and we'll get to those sometime next week to talk about that, and probably talk a little more about the UCLA shooting as well. If any new information comes up, and I'll look over some stuff over the weekend and just mention it a little next week, probably on Tuesday. So I have this last article, 5 things every boss should know about working with millennials. So I want to get the bio first on the girl that wrote it, this Allison Kruger, and it's not responding. I'm trying to, there's like a down arrow where if you click on it, it will give you the full bio. But when I do that, there's like a long running script and it doesn't give it to me. So we'll try to get that later. And it seems like the whole fucking article now. Let me try it on a different here. We'll try it on a different internet application. Forbes quoted today, being busy in effective pursuit of passion is one of the keys to happiness. And I don't really have time to process what they just said. And I am getting tired. So, okay, let me see if I can get this bio here. Full bio. It doesn't give one. It just says the author is a Forbes contributor. Well, I kind of assume that. I write about the world's gems, people's places, and ideas. And that's what she said. So anyway, to supplement my freelance journalism income, I took a job working on a research project. The idea was that I would spend a few days a week conducting interviews, focus groups, any tasks with which they needed help. It took me less than 2 hours. This is what she wrote in the article, and I can't see because my contacts are sticking to my eyes now. It took me less than 2 hours to realize the supervisor and I wanted different things from the project. They were looking for someone who would make their lives easier, who would do any task from chasing down research to cleaning up food after group sessions. Yeah, that doesn't sound like something, that you're doing something as a freelance journalist on a research project, but you're cleaning up their fucking food. Now, if that's your first job out of college, sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do, and you have to do them to get ahead. Now, obviously, she's writing for Forbes, so I would assume things worked out for her, but it said, so they were looking for someone who would make their lives easier, who would do any task from chasing down, I already said that, chasing down research to cleaning up food after group sessions. I, on the other hand, was looking for more of a partnership. After all, I had skills I wanted to use and tons of ideas to share. I thought it was my years of freelancing and being my own boss that made it hard for me to follow someone else's orders, but after doing some research, talking to workplace consultants, Lindsay Pollack, who specializes in millennials. I guess they have somebody who specializes in millennials now. Okay. And Alexandra Levitt, who advises young professionals on how to succeed in their careers. I realize it might also have to do with the fact that I am very much a millennial. So does that mean that they have, and, maybe it's a good investment, maybe it's not, but this kind of brings me back to the whole, not brings me back, but makes me think of the whole political correctness thing where they're doing things like, okay, well, we have to be this way to these types of people, so we're going to bring in experts on millennials and how to treat them and deal with them and whatever, and we're going to bring experts on people that are 50 plus, or I don't know. Anyway, millennials, people currently between the ages of 25 to 32. And I know it's bigger than that. So, but whatever, tend to be our own species in the workplace. Of course, a generalization about an entire demographic will not be accurate for each and every case, but the studies, such as the PwC's Next Gen study on how millennials view and impact the workplace and Deloitte's annual survey that point to trends in millennial behavior, are telling. Everything from what we wanted out of work, adventures over money, to our willingness to speak out with our opinions, very willing, to our work habits. We want to be left alone with our technology, differ greatly from our managers, even just 5 or 10 years older than us. And that has a great capacity to create friction regardless of your industry, even though 5 to 10 years older. If the ages are 25 to 32, what if your boss is 30 when you're 25? And that has a great capacity to create friction regardless of your industry. It's something I hear about from clients in insurance, to the lumber industry, to finance, to fashion, says Pollock. It is happening everywhere. It seems like with millennials that there's more articles and more studies and more talk about quote unquote millennials than any other generation out there. And maybe it's just because I pay attention more and I read more now than I did when I was younger. But I don't know. And am I still on the same article? Because I thought it listed them as numbers. I guess it doesn't number them. It just list them. So I guess number one, for millennials, their jobs are everything. A generation ago, most young professionals were married with children. Now, see, this contradicts the other article. By the time they entered the workplace, not anymore. Okay, so that's true, and that kind of holds true with the other article, that they're not married with children. So if you want to say their jobs are everything in that sense, but it says now their job is everything, how they introduce themselves at parties, what they did about during their free time, how they make friends, even how they express themselves creatively. And I'm skipping through some of this as I go through it. So I guess you could say it's everything in the sense of, yes, because they're not married and they don't have a family. But in the other article, it was, well, yes, they're waiting to get married and have kids, but they want a balance between work and personal life, more social life, hanging out with friends and stuff like that. Obviously, if you don't have kids or girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. Millennials certainly aren't shy. Now that is a big generalization and is something that, I think really makes the article I'm trying to think of a descriptive word for this, but because being shy has nothing to do, I think, with your age groups. That's more just based on the person. And it's not like all millennials were raised a certain way where they're not shy. And I think being shy is also genetic as well, along with how you grew up. So that takes away from, I think, the validity of the article. And that's what I was looking for. Again, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little tired here. So that definitely takes away from the article. But so I guess this would be number 3. Millennials aren't keen on grunt work. Well, is anybody really? I don't think, and I would think Generation X would be, at least what I observed, is more, would be less keen on grunt work than millennials, that they would want to do more things that are more important. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that is not true. But it says we won't pretend that this is the first time in history that young people have wanted more engaging work or been upset when boring or tedious assignments landed on their desk. But this is the first time they're speaking up about it. Okay, so they're saying that millennials are actually speaking up about the type of work they're getting when they're getting work that they believe they shouldn't be getting or is basically bullshit work. However, I think you can't go, and I really believe this, whether it's what I went through based on what I went through or not, but busy work is bullshit, and I don't believe in that. And I don't believe in just hanging out to hang out. There's people that will stay at work late just so they can show, hey, look, I stayed here late, even though they ain't got shit to do. And I would hate that. And I would hate the ignorant managers that would actually give them credit because they stayed longer. It's not how long you stay there. It's what you do while you're there, but the fact that you want to be able to skip out on having to pay your dues and to learn things and to do some work that you may not want to do is, it's fine for you to think that way, but in my opinion, it's not the reality, nor should it be the reality. Unless, you create your own business, then you're entitled to do whatever you want. And with the internet, a lot of not just millennials, but younger people in general, or people that wouldn't have been able to have been their own bosses, have had that opportunity. And a lot of it is obviously their own skills that allowed them to create what they created and their own ideas and their innovation and all of that. And that's, I think, a big plus of that you see with millennials. Millennials are obsessed with entrepreneurship. And that kind of contradicts the other article a little. It definitely contradicts what I said. So let me read this section here. And I guess this is number 5 in the end of the article, and then we can wrap it up. According to a study co-authored by Levitt and Deloitte, 70% of young professionals across the globe aspire to be their own boss. Well, no shit. Most people want to be their own boss. There are many explanations for why that number is so high. It's not that millennials are unique in their desire to be on their own. It's just that they are ballsier, says Levitt, which I disagree. The desire to be able to express yourself and be who you are is what the statistic is all about, says Pollock. The focus on doing their own thing can potentially be a problem for bosses. If employees are just buying their time until they can fly solo, many employees even build companies on the side where they are still employed. They aren't as vested in the company. Pollock suggests companies built in time for staff to satisfy their entrepreneurial leanings, something that is already being done in a few companies. Google has its 20% time, which allows employees to work on their own project 1 day a week. And Disney has the Clear Blue Sky initiative that gives funding to staff to develop their own ideas. And that it kind of just ends right there. But that's where, I mean, the whole being your own boss thing, I'd maybe agree with, but the being ballsier and being, and again, these are generalizations. And and she's basing this off of another study because she refuses she that shows how tired I'm getting. She what do you call it? She mentions somebody else's name, and that's not the word I was looking for. Refers to Pollock, who I guess did a study, but I don't necessarily, and again, this is just my opinion. What does that mean? And I guess it's limited, based on I don't hang out with a lot of people in general. So, I do tend to try to watch videos on YouTube of people in their early 20s, and I see a lot of immaturity and a lot of ignorance. But I guess that's entrepreneurial because these people, mostly girls, are getting, fucking 200,000 listeners or views from what they're doing. So, I mean, that's got to mean something right there in how they were able to establish that. So that does say something. The other thing that I think millennials have an advantage that other generations didn't have with the internet, that they have things like YouTube, where, you can become a YouTube star and actually make pretty good money. If you can get hundreds of thousands of listens, you can get some pretty good money. Now, not just from YouTube, but turn that into, advertising, donations, and all of those things. And, that could be your full-time job, and you could, again, be making pretty good money. Now, I don't know if that's what they're doing or how they're taking advantage of that. But so in that sense, that fits. But again, at the same time, they have resources that people that are in other generations really didn't have. Like this show, for example, I couldn't do this show without the internet. So, and I maybe am older than a millennial, and so before, things like Spreaker and Blog Talk Radio and stuff like that came out, I couldn't do a show. So the fact that now I'm trying to use the internet to actually build a business, to build some sort of media, I don't want to say media empire, big media empire. No, but some sort of media company, even if it's a small one, I'm still trying to do something where maybe I can build it up enough where I can get some advertising and make something on the side from it. I mean, that's not my main goal. My main goal is to get the ideas of freedom and liberty out there. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be doing this. I wouldn't just be doing a radio show. I may be trying to make movies because that's something that I wanted to do, and that's something that I went to school for. But I do like doing radio, and I did want to do radio years ago as well and talk about politics. And I wasn't to the extent I am now with my beliefs, but I was close to that. I didn't believe in the political parties. I didn't believe in all this government. I didn't believe that drugs. I believe that drugs should be legal and stuff like that, but I had still believed that there should be a government, unlike now. So it is something that I've been wanting to do for a while anyway, but the fact that the technology is there now, it gives me that opportunity, and it gives a lot of people an opportunity to be an innovator, to come up with an idea that you can do on the internet, whether it's selling something or, creating any kind of online business. You could come up with a product. You could be a clothes designer and start your own website and build a whole big brand of clothes, and from the internet turn it into start distribution into stores that way, all from starting something on the internet. These things were not available, and I think millennials are seeing people and hearing of stories of people that have become multimillionaires because of what they've done on the internet. Now, there's not as many as you think, but it's a lot easier for somebody to become, say, an internet millionaire than to become a CEO of a corporation and become a millionaire that way. And I'm talking of a big existing corporation, not, developing your own corporation online. So, but that's all we have for tonight. I actually enjoyed that, talking about millennials, and I hope I have a lot of millennial listeners, and my goal is not to insult anybody when it comes to that, so hopefully I didn't. What I hope is that more millennials get into the ideas of freedom, not into the ideas of socialism, and not into people like Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders would destroy things so fucking fast. It's, if you want to learn about socialism and communism, which is really what he wants, go out there and learn about it, and then see if you're still for Bernie Sanders, and go out there and study when the U.S. actually was they still are a superpower, but somewhat of a legitimate one. But when they had closer to a free market and how things thrived. And at the same time, you can't build your own business and not expect to be giving not only taxes up, but giving ownership of it up with a Bernie Sanders in charge. If you have a dream of being in charge of your own business, don't expect to have that dream with Bernie Sanders as, the president, or the way things are going, any government for that matter. So again, I hope that, millennials right now are the future. And of course, their kids as well. And I hope that they learn more about the ideas of freedom and the truth about freedom and liberty, not the bullshit that they want to present on, government media and all of that. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will be back on Tuesday. Thanks again, everybody.
Listen to police officers'
Peace.
commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the law. We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to pick the laws. We enforce them. But at the end of the day, each and every member is to go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and it is Thursday. I had to think what day it was. It is Thursday, June 2nd, 2016, and we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com and to the archives immediately following the show on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, and SoundCloud, as well as the next day on Stitcher. On Nonpartisan Liberty for All, we promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty and self-ownership, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom. Exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. And we are happy to hear from you today and every day that we are on the air at 702-470-7664. That is the phone number, 702-470-7664. You can also Skype into the show by sending a Skype request, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and just sending your name and what you want to talk about. And you can check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, which links to all our Facebook pages, our other social media info, as well as our contact info and more, including the new series that I've been working on, which I'm trying to come up with a name for it, because it's more in an article format, but it's also kind of a blog. So right now I'm calling it an article/blog, but in the future, maybe we'll call it a blogicle or something. But anyway, I'm writing a series on the drug war and why all drugs should be legal. Right now, I'm on part 3, so there are 3 articles. Each article can stand alone, but is also part of the series. I'm going to try to cover every aspect that I can and that I have ideas on. So this is more of a long-term project, and I hope to at least release an article once a week, if not more. So as last week, I think I did all 3 articles last weekend. So it all depends on, how much time I have to do that. So that is the plan. But there are also other articles, editorials, and things like that on the site as well. So please check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. UCLA.com. We have a few different things I want to cover today. One, the shooting at UCLA and how that was handled, and how a lot of these shootings are being handled. And in this shooting, it was definitely a targeted shooting, whereas whereas in many instances you have just shootings where lunatics want to come and just shoot a bunch of people. This was a targeted shooting. And I don't get why it happening in a school. It could have had clips when somebody will take and edit a clip together of different newscasts, and they'll all say the same fucking thing. And it's like, you know why. But on a side note, I made a bad choice earlier today, and I do this over and over again, and I'm sure a lot of you guys do it as well. So there's like a sweet, I'm sure everybody has sweets that they like and they get, and they know that if they get it and have too much of it, or if it's a certain size, like a shake, and drink the whole thing or eat the whole thing, that it's probably going to upset their stomach or make them a little sick because of the sugar, or maybe just too much of it, or for whatever reason. But of course, you forget how you feel after. You just remember how you feel at that moment that you want to have that shake, and you get it anyway and end up drinking the whole thing, and then you're sick to your stomach. And that's how I feel right now. Drinking some water. So I just had to add that there. But really the only difference between this, unless there's things that I'm unaware of, which is possible, between this and, because what if he went to the professor's house, which probably would have been a lot smarter, actually. Although the difference is that, you know, when you go to a school, that most likely no one there is going to have a gun. If you go to their house, although this is in California, so it's not the easiest place to get a gun. But if you go to their house, there's a better chance that they could also have a gun. But in this case, I would say that they probably would have had a better chance of going to their house, because the amount of police that ended up showing up, and I don't know how the police were alerted. In all the videos that I watched, it really didn't go into that. So I'm still not sure how they were alerted. Hopefully, we can find some of that out. So I'm going to talk more about that. We're also going to talk all about... Sorry about that. I usually put my phone on, I gotta remember. I do it with my computer, where essentially you will not hear any notifications. I went through everything because I thought it was unprofessional, and I'd hear it on other shows that you'd hear their notifications off their Facebook or something like that. And you'd hear it every fucking show, and you're like, really? You can't just fucking turn off the notifications? Anyway, so I, of course, apologize for that. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about tonight is, I guess I will call them millennials, even though I think millennials go up to people in their early 30s, but we'll say the low end of millennials. I don't think you can group like that. Like, and I don't want to really say this, but potentially, I guess I would end up in a millennial based on the age that I say. But say potentially I wouldn't, and I'd end up in a Generation X. But I think they put Generation X from like 1960 to 1980. How can you possibly do that? Because people that grew up in the 1980s do not have anywhere near the same experiences as the people that grew up in the 1960s. Happened anywhere. It's just the people that they had planned on shooting were at the school. So obviously that's the best place to shoot them. There were two professors. One was shot, and then they had found a list. And we'll get into that in more detail later in the show. But I just wanted to say this regarding the list, that they make it sound like the fucking media, government media, they make it sound like he had a big, long list and he just didn't get to it. Now, keep in mind, this is a murder-suicide. So this kid killed himself after he killed a professor. So he was going to kill two professors, killed himself. I believe the other one was a professor. But he was going to kill two. He was going to kill two professors. And I guess he couldn't find the other one. So he said, fuck it, I'll just kill myself. It was probably by that point, the school was crawling with cops and there was no way he was going to get to the other professor. But they make it sound like he had like a list of like 20 people. When you get into the details. So what happens today in media is we live in a time where everything's headlines. You hear a couple lines of a fucking story, so much goes on. We have so much media now outside of government media, so because of the internet. But there are so many forms of delivery. So you might just hear a headline and think that, okay, this crazy lunatic, and I'm not saying that he wasn't crazy, but what I am saying is that these were targeted killings, but you might hear part of the story and think that he had a list of 20 people that he was going to kill. And that wasn't the case. He had planned on killing two people. So, and this was targeted. It wasn't everyone's in school, everyone that went to the school is in danger. And I can just picture how people that went to the school that didn't even, there were UCLA is a huge school. There's 40,000 people there. And how some of the kids play it up like, yeah, I was at the school where the professor was killed, and yeah, I was nowhere near it, and I didn't know him or anything, but oh my God, and like they need to be fucking consoled, and all the, how they play it up and all that bullshit. And I'm sorry, I don't feel bad for any of the kids that didn't know the professor, that weren't anywhere near the shooting. Now, obviously, I feel bad for the professor and his family, and any kids who happen, and I don't think anybody even seen it, but if you happen to see it, that can be very traumatizing to see somebody kill somebody as well. But outside of that, and it sounds like this kid or man I don't know if I'm looking at the shooter or the other person on the list. No, it was the shooter. Was 38 years old. He was a former doctoral student. So I don't know if anybody really even knew him. So, and it's not clear if the other person that he was going to shoot was in Minnesota or not. So, because this is just an article that was just released that he was a former doctoral student, Minnesota resident, left a list at his home in that state that included the names of the woman, UCLA professor William Klug, that's the one that was killed, and a second professor who was safe. So, and then it says authorities declined to name the woman in Minnesota or a possible motive. So, it sounds like the other professor was not even a UCLA person wanting to kill somebody else for whatever reason. That it wasn't about some lunatic wanting to shoot a place up. It was about specific, a specific person that they wanted to kill for whatever reason or injured. And a lot of times in those cases, you have other people that get shot accidentally. And of course they love when that happens because then they can throw that in as well. But they're not the same thing. And you can't look at them the same way because, again, you're looking at the place where a shooting occurred. It doesn't even have to be a shooting. What about just a place where a murder occurred? And the fact that it's a shooting in this case doesn't really mean anything, in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. Because you have this professor, you have this 38-year-old man. I don't think he would have had a problem with a sword or a big knife or something like that. They showed pictures of the professor who got killed. Oh, maybe they haven't. I was looking at a picture of, I think, Celine Dion's husband. He fell out of bed the day of his death. I didn't even know. I thought I had heard he had died. He was like a lot older than her. But I thought in the same article that they showed a picture of the professor somewhere. Maybe not. Actually, you know what? I did see a picture of the professor when I looked at all the YouTube videos, and he was actually young. So I guess it's possible, although he didn't look like a guy, and this is a total generalization. It doesn't mean anything. He didn't look like a guy who could fight or something, but he could have possibly ran or got away, I guess, if he didn't have a gun. I don't know enough about the specific confrontation, but the point being is that for whatever reason, and it might have been some lunatic reason, usually if somebody commits first-degree murder, and first-degree murder is premeditated murder, unless it's something like the guy, raped and murdered the murderer's wife or daughter, or did something really bad to them like that, I would say in the majority of cases, and this is just my opinion, of course, that if you commit first-degree murder, you're most likely crazy or you're an assassin who's doing it for the money. And I don't mean to laugh at that, but I'm saying, that would be the only other reason that I could think of as to why somebody would commit first-degree murder, which, again, first-degree murder is premeditated murder. So, in this case, this was a guy. I'm kind of pausing because I can hear people outside, and I'm always nervous about them being in my backyard messing with my dog, because we have had incidences of people next door not only leaving notes but actually going into our backyard trying to tell us that we shouldn't have left the dog out and it was abuse, even though it was like 75 degrees and we leave water, and I don't see what the problem is. And it's a pretty big, it's not a big backyard, but I mean, it's a big backyard for a fucking dog, for especially a little dog. But anyway, so what were really making this not we, because I'm not doing it, but what the government and government media, and I say government whether they said a word about it or not, because they're backing the government media, giving them their talking points, telling them the stories to say. It's funny when you hear those professor. So looking at this and how they handled it, and we'll get into that later, and how kids there probably compare this to stuff like Columbine or Virginia Tech, or, those few shootings. I know they want to, of course, increase the amount of shootings, even though shootings keep going down every year, but that this was totally different. How is this different? And in all seriousness, how is this different than somebody wanting to kill two people for whatever reason, going to their house and shooting them? And say going to both persons' houses. So they go to the first person, they shoot them. Then say the cops show up and they know they can't get away, so they kill themselves. Now, that would be looked at in a totally different light. However, what's the fucking difference? There isn't one. But because it happens to be in a school, and keep in mind, we are not talking about a fucking high school or elementary school or anything that could probably, fit in an area of, I don't know. I mean, it's a 40,000 student school. And I don't know if I'm big into college football, and I don't know if the Bruins Stadium, they play at the Rose Bowl, so it's obviously it's not on campus. Do they play? Yeah, UCLA plays at the Rose Bowl, so the stadium isn't on campus, but I don't know how far it is, and I've been right around that area because when I had worked for Avery Dennison, their corporate office is like right there in that area, in the general area. But this is a huge school. So making this out to be a school shooting, which it happened at a school, fine, it's a school shooting, but making it out to be a school shooting in the same vein as a lot of these other school shootings it doesn't do it justice. Because like I said, when you have, they don't like to differentiate, and I think this is on purpose, obviously, because you have the government media wants to ban guns. I don't give a fuck what they say. They'd like to ban every fucking gun there is, the government, and only, of course, have tons of guns for them, so guns wouldn't be going anywhere. As far as the manufacturing would probably stay the same or even increase, because every government agent is going to have a fucking gun. But unless you're part of the government, you're not going to have one. So I don't give a fuck what they say. They'd love to get rid of every gun. So they love the narrative that in each shooting that takes place within an area that would be referred to as a school or a place of higher education or higher learning or lower learning, I guess, as well, in the case of elementary schools, or which it's very bad, of course, when something like that happens. But high schools is the main, when it comes to school shootings. Colleges and high schools are the main places where they have taken place. But they rarely they do differentiate in the sense that, yes, if you want to get into the story, if you want to take the time to read the fine print, you can find out that, okay, this was based on this